A wheel turned yet in anger in 2020. Formula One silly season is in full swing. There's been a big shake-up on the grid at the back and in the midfield, and we're here to dissect everything that's happened in the past week. Welcome back to the Formula One Grid Talk podcast. We are powered by the F1 Chronicle. Visit F1 Chronicle for news, views, and on all things F1. Hosting today will be me, George Howson, and joining me are McLaren superfan Owen Davies.
Hello.
Co-host of the Inside Line podcast, Kunal Shah.
Hi.
And motorsport journalist and broadcaster, Chris Medland.
Hello.
So, gentlemen, fair to say there's been some pretty big announcements in the last week or so. I mean, starting with you, Chris, let's start with the first one that kind of kicked all this off. Sebastian Vettel announcing that he will leave Ferrari at the end of this 2020 season.
Yeah, you and I had a quick chat before doing this podcast, and I had to admit that I was not ready for it on Tuesday morning. So we'd done a call with Seb about 3 weeks ago now, maybe 4 weeks ago, and he'd been saying that he was hoping to get his future sorted before the season started. He'd just get there as soon as he could, basically, and that they were in talks. And at that point, didn't really read too much into it, other than maybe the whole dynamic with Leclerc was going to make it not ideal for him, but I didn't see him walking away quite so quickly, if that makes sense. So less than 4 weeks later, when suddenly the news broke out of Germany on late Monday night, I was fast asleep already. So I woke up to a load of messages Tuesday morning and started scrabbling around to try and verify it. And just as I got the first person to kind of say, yeah, this is legit, then the press release dropped to say he was leaving. So yeah, it all kicked off.
Yeah, it's all well and truly kicked off. Silly season is in full flow, like I said. I mean, Vettel leaving Ferrari, Kunal, it's something that's been rumoured for a long time, but now it's actually been confirmed. It seems like such a surprise. It's such a huge deal for the sport.
It is. And, Mattia Binotto keeps referring to how this is a new Ferrari that he's leading and how they're learning and they're, gaining experience. And, they've hired literally the youngest ever driver lineup they've had in like 50 years. It's taken everyone by surprise because, Ferrari usually leave their drivers way past their best by date. That's probably my favorite line to summarize, their driver decisions of the last several years. So it's a surprise sometimes, depending on if you feel emotional for Seb and what he's gone through. It depends if it's a pleasant surprise or not.
Yeah. I mean, Owen, was it a surprise to Vettel though? Because I kind of get the impression that Vettel's been pushed rather than him jumping off the Ferrari bandwagon himself.
Yeah, that's difficult to say, really. I guess we'll never really know. But I suppose all I would say is that the situation at Ferrari at the time where Vettel signed for Ferrari is just so kind of light years different to how it is now. And I think when he signed, he had Kimi alongside him, and he's now got a young, aggressive driver who's really pushing very hard. And I think Ferrari maybe kind of have one eye on the future. And yeah, they're thinking long term with this move, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we'll get on to who's going to replace Sebastian Vettel at Ferrari. But Chris, I mean, is it a case of like Vettel? Where's Vettel going to go, do we think now? Because it's possible. I mean, he's 32, 33 years old now. It's possible that he might take a year out or perhaps even retire fully, but we just don't know at the moment.
Yeah, I think if I had to put money on it right now, I'd have my money on him not being on the grid next year. I just don't think there's a competitive enough seat that is going to really motivate him enough right now. The fact that he wasn't willing to do another deal with Ferrari means it's not the be all and end all that he's in a winning car, clearly, but it is one that he feels that he's on equal terms or valued. And I think there's not many teams that can give him the right sort of equipment and wage, I guess, and everything else that's going to make him feel valued. So I do wonder if he'll take a year off because, like I say, he's younger than a lot of people think. I mean, he's 2.5 years younger than Lewis, and no one's telling him to retire yet. They're talking about at 39, 40. Kimi's still racing at 40. I mean, on that timeline, he's got 8 years in him still. So I think he could take a year off and come back, or look to come back if he wants to the following year, and better opportunities from then.
Yeah, we don't know truly what he's going to do, but the downfall of Sebastian Vettel, though, I mean, Kunal, he was the closest challenger to Hamilton in 2017 and 2018, and last year Leclerc's come into the team and he's really made it his own. It's just completely unsettled Vettel. It's been and it just seems like perhaps he's lost some of his motivation now.
Yeah, and the mistakes that have become trademark Vettel have sort of kept repeating. And some of his most diehard fans always hope that, okay, that's it. This is the last race we're going to see a mistake, and from next race he's going to be back to being the lethal Sep that we saw during the Red Bull days. But unfortunately, that's sort of not, that turn of events hasn't happened for him. And you could also ask how much longer would Ferrari have been patient with his mistakes and his ego clashes that happened last year. And again, all of it very valid, all of it a part of the story that became so prominent through all of 2019. But it will be interesting to see what Vettel does from here. And two former drivers that I was reading made very valid inputs. One was Mark Webber saying that Bernie Eccleston is probably guiding Ferrari through this whole mess. So you probably can't get a better advisor than that, especially if it's a personal friendship that Vettel shares. And the second was from David Coulthard, where he said that Vettel was last year focusing on building Ferrari to make them into a world champion team, whereas Leclerc was driving just to beat Vettel. So they were sort of driving to two different objectives, and now we are seeing a very different outcome that probably none of us saw coming.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? Less than 2 years after Vettel finishes running up in the championship, he's been effectively ousted from Ferrari by Charles Leclerc. I mean, that's how effective Leclerc has been. But the man to replace Vettel at Ferrari, Owen, Carlos Sainz, formerly of McLaren, will be still obviously driving for McLaren this year. I mean, how do you feel about Sainz's departure from McLaren? I mean, it's like Norris, he's a very exciting young driver, but Sainz's performances last season arguably made him driver of the season.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think a lot of the McLaren fans, if I can speak for them, is they're gutted that he's going, because he's been such a great driver for McLaren. He's so professional. He's just a class act, and a lot of his performances last year, he's a great racing driver, and he's invariably scored the maximum points across all the races, and it's not really been captured a lot on the F1 coverage for whatever reason, but he invariably ends up in the top 10, and he's a great racing driver, and he's also a great team player as well, and I think that's probably something that appeals to Ferrari as well, someone who can kind of think of the bigger picture rather than just kind of focusing on their own performance. So I'm gutted that he's leaving McLaren.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, how do we think Sainz is going to fare at Ferrari? I mean, like Kunal says, it's Ferrari's youngest driver lineup for over 50 years. But Sainz is an experienced driver. When he's finished this season, it'll be his 6th season in the sport. It's going to be an interesting partnership with him and Leclerc, definitely.
Yeah, it certainly is. It's a weird one, because when I was asked who I thought would go there, I thought Ricciardo would be ahead of Sainz on the hit list for Ferrari, because a little bit more experienced alongside Leclerc. Leclerc's only had 2 seasons in F1. Yes, last year was great, but you're at Ferrari that's meant to be challenging for wins and titles. It is a tough ask. If you're suddenly throwing him into that role that Kunal mentioned of trying to build a team to win a championship, that's a lot to ask of someone of Leclerc's age and experience. So I thought they'd have someone who had a bit more of that alongside him. So to go for Carlos, I think, is actually a sign of how far Ferrari think they've got to go, maybe in this new look F1 with a budget cap and with the failings they've had in the past, to get back to the championship winning kind of level. And I mean, Carlos is a great driver. I hope it doesn't stunt his progress. I really hope he's not going there to be a number 2. I hope Ferrari are going to let them be equal number 1s as such. And there's a chance they will do that, because Carlos, as Owen says, does have more experience than Charles does, and has experience for a number of teams where, I mean, Renault's a works team, so he's had that experience before. McLaren, obviously a big team. Toro Rosso's up against Max and the pressure of the Red Bull program, so it's good experience he's got. But between the two of them now, they've got 2 wins and 11 podiums in total, and that's a Ferrari driver lineup, and it's a big departure from where they've been in the past. It's not but that's not a fair reflection of their ability, but it is a sign of their experience at the front. So it's a big mix-up, and I think in that sense it represents a bit of a gamble.
It's definitely a gamble. When you take a punt on a new driver, it's always a gamble. I mean, like you were saying there, Chris, Ricciardo was linked with the move. Kunal, I mean, half the grids were probably linked with that Ferrari seat. Do you think Ferrari have got the right man though? Because Sainz has been one of the hottest prospects on the grid. He's a former Red Bull Academy driver. But at the same time, I think a couple of years ago, he ended up getting beaten fair and square over a season by Nico Hülkenberg at Renault. So it's an interesting one.
It's interesting, and we're all talking good things about Sainz after literally just one great season that he had, with McLaren, and it's the same with McLaren. McLaren suddenly seemed like this team that has transformed in just the last season that they had. So, like Chris said, I would have loved to see Daniel Ricciardo there for several reasons that he's already explained. And all we can hope is that this new look Ferrari is sort of able to tackle the might of Lewis in a Mercedes and Max in a Red Bull, because those are pretty lethal combinations as well. And Charles Leclerc, who they are hoping to put all their might behind for a drivers championship challenge, will need a lot of support from the team and from his number 2 driver, so to say, if Carlos is in that role, to make the miracle happen.
Yeah, Ferrari traditionally do the firm number 1 and the firm number 2, and you have to think that Sainz would be that number 2. But whether he'll accept that or whether he'll end up being that, who knows? I mean, Charles Leclerc was number 2 on paper at Ferrari, but it didn't end up being like that at all last season. They were mentioning quite a few times, though, in Daniel Ricciardo, he's not gone to Ferrari, but he has gone to McLaren for 2021. Are you happy with that announcement?
Yeah, I am, actually. I think, given the news that Carlos is going, I think it is the best outcome for McLaren. I think he's a proven race winner, which we didn't have before. He's a bit more experienced than Carlos, maybe. So I think that's good news for Lando as well, who can kind of potentially learn a bit from him. And I think he's a lively personality. It's going to be great fun watching those two next year. So yeah, bring it on. It sounds good.
It's a great partnership, isn't it, Chris? I mean, Ricciardo and Norris are a young and an older driver. I mean, it's easy to forget that Ricciardo's, I think he's 30 years old, 31 this year. Him and Norris, I think that's an excellent combination for McLaren going forward.
Yeah, just don't call Daniel old, because I'm the same age as him. So he's still young, all right? Very young. But yeah, you're right.
I'm getting there.
He's kind of the right mix, isn't he, at the moment? He's the right kind of experience, but still a long time in the sport. I think he'll be a great fit with Lando. I think that's also going to be something that could sort of... Lando doesn't need to learn so much on track from Daniel, because each driver will say, there's only so much you can take from each other. It's all about your own ability and your own confidence. But what he can take from him will be the ability to be himself and to be this kind of character and still be successful, still be really hard-nosed on track and relaxed and have fun off it. I think that pairing will work really well. I think McLaren have done brilliantly out of this, to be honest. I think if you were going to lose Carlos to then get Daniel in instead, I mean, part of me thinks Zach Brown probably sat there and thought, if I had a clean sheet of paper and I could pick 2 out of 3, he'd have been really hard pushed to pick, the combination of Norris or Ricciardo or Sainz. But I think he'd have traded Sainz for Ricciardo if he was being really, really cold, if he was being really clinical, because that is a race winner, very marketable. It's someone they wanted 2 years ago. But the job Carlos did last year, you couldn't and wouldn't get rid of him for Daniel. But when your hand's forced, suddenly it's perfect. So I think McLaren have done really well out of that. And I think this will work well for them. Obviously, still got to give him both Daniel and Lando a good enough car. But yeah, I think that was the best outcome. Because I did wonder about what if Seb went there. But that adds a totally different level of pressure. And the team has just been so, internally, the atmosphere has been so different since Fernando left. Just this kind of energy that's within it. And I think that losing Carlos, risked losing that, and bringing Daniel in makes sure that continues.
Yeah, the memes and the off-track joking are going to be legendary in between those two. I can't wait. I can't wait for that. But yeah, McLaren doing very well out of this. I'm sure that Ferrari are happy as well. But the big losers in all of this so far, Kunal, are Renault, who've lost their lost arguably their main man. I mean, they have Esteban Ocon for this year and next year on loan from Mercedes, but losing Daniel Ricciardo is a big blow for that team.
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty surprised by Cyril's statement, to be honest. There was some pretty heavy words used in there. But if you see how Renault have, sort of picked and dropped drivers specifically, since their return, I think, they've probably gotten what they've given in the past, right? And to me, I also think that Renault will probably take their time in making their decision on who will be with Ocon. It won't be as soon as, we heard about Ferrari and McLaren and their replacements. But, I also believe that Renault have some more way to go before being able to attract a star driver like Daniel Ricciardo back again. It's probably not just going to be all about the money.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, his move to Renault was probably money motivated, but also partly because of Verstappen forcing him out of Red Bull. But I think this has been a real recovery for Daniel Ricciardo. I feared for the guy. I don't know if you feared for him as well, Owen, thinking that going to Renault, that could have been, he's at that sort of age where he's at his peak. He's not really going to get much better. But, it seemed like his career could have gone stagnant. But McLaren on a real upward trajectory at the moment.
Yeah, I think he'll be welcome there, and there's a lot of kind of new people coming into McLaren, James Key, Andreas Seidel, people like that, who are just kind of getting integrated into that team. So he's for me, he's coming in at the right point, and he can make it whatever he wants it to be there. I think he's 30 years old, so the next 4 to 5 years, he really needs, if he's wanting the championship, then he needs to be building up to something. And I think that's McLaren are on exactly the same path as well. So there's a nice bit of synergy there. So yeah, it's good.
So Chris, Kunal said that it might take quite a while for Renault to announce their second driver. But who's being mentioned? I know I think they got Jack Aitken and Guan Yu Zhou, probably said that wrong, in Formula 2 as junior drivers. But the problem for them as well is that Ocon isn't really one of their drivers. He's still on loan from Mercedes for the next 2 years, isn't he?
Yeah, Ocon was a good get for them, but yeah, isn't one that they can, say can't hold on to. It depends. If George Russell ends up going to Mercedes, jumping Ocon, then I imagine he'd be free to stay put. But that's all ifs and buts. Jack Aitken's actually left Renault at the end of last year because at the time there was no opportunities for him. Ocon had just come in, Daniel was there. It didn't look like he was going to be able to muster his way in. So he joined Williams, who needed someone with a super license. So he was closer to a seat there. But you never know. Those ties, maybe they'll revisit that. I think Guan Yu Zhou's more likely in the sense of the interest from China. There'll be good backing. He's been improving well in F2, but that'll be dependent on how he does this season. So like Kunal says, I don't think they'll move that quickly. I think this is the first time a proper door's open for Fernando to come back because he hasn't been there for a while, but that is the team that he won his titles with. They'd be warm to him. If you look at Fernando, where his opportunities are going to be, if he's ever going to win another championship, can't go back to Ferrari. Mercedes looks so unlikely. I can never see it, but you never know. Say Vettel retired, say Lewis retired, maybe Merck would turn to him, but they've got Russell, they've got Ocon, they're never going to need to. Red Bull's going to be close to him. So either a return to McLaren or a return to Renault were the only two big enough name options that might give you a race-winning car under new regs. So this might be the only time one of those two seats is there for him. He has to do 1 year under the old regs and then hope that 2022 proves to be better. But that's the only scenario I see for him to come back as well. So they're the kind of, I think Joe is probably more likely out of that. I do think Kunal's right. Renault sit on this because people's comments definitely show that they weren't ready to go with someone equally as exciting or that they were equally as happy with in the way that McLaren were with Ricciardo to replace Sainz and Ferrari were with Sainz to replace Vettel. But what I do think will be very interesting is that Ricciardo's got a race for Renault for the rest of this year after that little swipe from Beeple. But also Renault and McLaren look really closely matched again pre-season. So if we get some racing, the amount of times we might see Ricciardo having to race Carlos and Lando hard for the team that's already had a go at him is going to be really fascinating to watch. Because if he doesn't pull it off, you can see a Beeple having another go.
We're getting even less sleep, I think, this season because the guy stresses so much. He's going to be sweating bullets if it's going to the last round of the season and they're 4th and 5th. But who knows? We don't even know where the pace of the cars are truly yet because we haven't had a race, unfortunately. But I mean, you mentioned Fernando Alonso. I mean, he's always linked with these big moves, Kunal. I mean, what do you think? Do you think there's a realistic chance of him coming back? I mean, what will he be in 2021? Will he be 39, 40 years old?
You can probably never leave Fernando out of pulling out a surprise, like this. Personally speaking, I'm enjoying his pursuit of everything outside of Formula One more than what he was able to do in Formula One the last 4-5 years, because we all know how the McLaren Honda and then the McLaren Renault relationship worked, with Fernando at the wheel. I would love to see him have a go at Dakar. I would love to see him, do a full season at, of the IndyCar, or, a genuine pursuit of the Indy 500. He's sort of brought in a lot more energy and galvanized a lot of series together by creating all these, ancillary opportunities. Everyone's, jumping onto the Fernando bandwagon. Everyone wants, him to race in their series. So I would love for him to do that. But, I agree with Chris that, if there was ever an option, given the new reg changes expected and so on, and like we've heard rumors that Liberty Media might foot a part of the bill and so on, we might just see Fernando back. He's still one of the best names in the business from marketing and a fan point of view as well. So you never know if he actually makes it happen, and if he goes up against Ocon, and that'll be another interesting rivalry to chase.
It's definitely fascinating. I mean, there's still the question of that 3rd title. You can tell he still wants it. He's going for the Triple Crown, obviously, but the 3rd title in F1, Owen, it might be too tantalising for him to turn down if Renault do come for him. But do you think Renault will take the chance on him just because of the negative impact he can have on these teams? I mean, McLaren, obviously, you mentioned that the cloud that was over the team is gone now that he's gone. You could argue the same happened at Ferrari. The same definitely happened at McLaren the first time he was there. So would Renault want to take a chance on him?
Well, I guess Renault kind of know what they're getting themselves into because they've worked with them before. So yeah, I think it's possible. As you say, there's a lot of potential behind this move. Liberty are kind of very much behind it as well, as far as I can tell. So the only thing I would say is that whatever Fernando does next year, he needs to think about the Indy 500 and how that fits into the kind of racing calendar as well. So he might have to have kind of multiple contracts going on with lots of different people potentially, which may complicate things, but we'll wait and see.
I never know. JB could step in at Monaco again if he's racing in Indy. What is he? He's only 40 years old. Yeah, he could step in.
And it's quicker on sim racing we've seen this week. So.
Oh yeah, the virtual GPs. He's been competing in that. He's pretty damn decent. The young whippersnappers though, Russell, Leclerc, Albon, they're the ones dominating that. It's so good to see. But Lando Norris, unfortunately, just can't get any luck in that series. I feel so bad for him. He's tried to qualify for every one of them, and something's always stopped him. Usually his internet connection. But yeah, the news does not stop there. There's also been an announcement this week as well. I'm sure Chris will be able to tell us a lot more about this, that there will be 2 races at Silverstone, 2 British Grand Prix.
Yeah, I think we're likely to have 2 Austrian Grand Prix as well. It's just that there's so much work going on in getting that first race kind of safe and trying to happen that they haven't made a big deal about the fact that they'll do 2 there if they do. But Silverstone was looking to make some money out of this. Rumour had it, I think it was a BBC report to be fair, but it did definitely tally with the way Silverstone work, was that the race hosting fee normally is 15 million quid that Silverstone pay F1, and that in order to host 2 races and help F1 get its season going, Silverstone demanded 15 million quid from F1 to do that, which was pushing it. But I can see that they would get some sort of compensation. I mean, you're going to have your costs covered if you're not able to make money from fans, especially Silverstone that gets huge crowds. You're normally seeing like 350,000 people over the weekend there. So they did need some form of payback for that. But yeah, it's a it's a venue that's easy for all the teams to get to. It makes a lot of sense. There's talk that you could use different layouts, but I think there'd be uproar if you used anything other than the Grand Prix layout there, because it's just the drivers love it. You imagine if you put them on one that didn't have Maggots and Beckett's on or something like that. So yeah, that's going to be one that's it's all about trying to get momentum going. Basically, if you can, the first round or two, you have to put so much effort in to prove you get it right and safe, and then you get a blueprint for future ones. So by having 2 events at the first 2 rounds, essentially, you end up with a bigger timeline to prove to other countries and other race circuits what can be done and it can be safe, and you buy yourself a bit more time to then agree with them and go and host those races too. So it's all about just really building some momentum in the easiest possible way, because if you look at something like the Bundesliga that started yesterday, obviously that's internal in one country, so it's a little bit easier to manage, and in a sense everyone's trying to make it a little bit more like that. For 2 weeks you're in just one country.
Yeah, and I think as well, F1 have mentioned some sort of bubble they want to take around the world with them, Kunal. You know, people only interacting with each other. It's going to be a logistical nightmare, really. I mean, like Chris says, they're going to try and ease that with 2 races at Austria, 2 races at Britain. Are there any rumblings about 2 races, I don't know, the Hungaroring or anything like that?
Sorry, come again? I lost your...
It's all right. Are there any rumblings about, any rumours about more venues hosting 2 races?
I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, you know, if they stick to having 2 races at multiple venues, especially in the circuits in Europe. And, you know, another thing that, you know, Chase Carey has admitted to doing as well is to having talks with circuits that weren't on, you know, the 2020 calendar originally. So, you know, if this blueprint works, like we've been saying, that, you know, having 2 weekends is giving them enough time to, you know, space things out, get things right, I think we may well just see them, you know, hosting 2 races at a venue. Also, because, you know, there is a certain minimum number of races that Formula One would need to host from a business and a championship point of view. So, you know, after a point, it might just be that, hey, it's okay if we just don't go around the world in 2020, and it's just okay if we get those minimum, I think it's 8 or, you know, so on. And then Cyril said that they need about 14, 15 races to break even. So I assume that they will sort of, you know, keep evaluating their decision, you know, time and again.
Yeah, it's a very ambitious project that F1 are trying to do. I think it's starting in Europe in July, and then I think they work around Asia, and then over to North America, and then to the Middle East. Finally, Owen, it's very ambitious given the circumstances at the moment. It only takes a few people to have coronavirus to transmit it to people. It's a very big risk, but they have to try it.
Yeah, I can't imagine the kind of logistical work that's going into this, and in terms of the social distancing side of things between all the people in the paddock and all that, and how that is policed and how the testing works as well. Yeah, it's pretty complex, but it'll be a great moment when they release a definitive F1 calendar, so we know what we're looking at definitively, and we can actually watch some racing, albeit without spectators, which is going to be odd, and probably I think that part might take a bit of getting used to, watching a race without any atmosphere, I suppose.
Yeah, it was very strange watching the German matches at Bundesliga the weekend. No fans being there. I mean, F1 does have an atmosphere with obviously the engines of the cars, but no fans being there, it's going to be very strange. I mean, Kunal mentioned, Chris, about, you know, some races that they have to try and host from like a business point of view. I guess we'd expect races like the Dutch Grand Prix and Vietnam to really try and push to get their races through, because it's the first time those races are going to be hosted in Dutch Grand Prix's case, the first time in 35 years, and Vietnam first time ever.
Yeah, Vietnam especially are working really hard on that, because they built a brand new circuit for it. They had everything ready to go because it was so early in the season, and the amount of investment they put in. And if it's difficult to look at what other countries have done, but if you look at the reports that have come out and the figures that have come out, they dealt very well with the coronavirus situation. So they want to then have a public global platform to tell that story essentially and say what a job they've done. So yeah, Vietnam are pushing hard, and I think they're kind of open to a number of different dates towards the end of the year whenever it really fits with F1. For Zandvoort, it'd be a lot harder. They've got to fit into this kind of European spell. They need a bit of lead time. Obviously, the big selling point for that race was Max being there and the amount of fans they were going to have. So in a sense, that race looks far less attractive to those organisers not having fans there at all. every venue wants fans, but everyone was looking forward to seeing that Orange Army sort of thing, weren't they? And the atmosphere that would have created. So I think that's something where we might see Zandvoort not come back onto the calendar. The calendar I've seen and sort of verified with some of it came out of the support categories. So I do some work with F2, and through F2, it looks like Hungary would be after Silverstone, and then it would probably be heading to either Spain or Germany before Belgium and Italy, and then heading to Baku. So it's trying to cram it in that way. Singapore would go, Russia's questionable, and then we'd head out to Asia properly. So if you could do that, as Kunal said, you get the minimum number of races in as well through just the European rounds. And if suddenly travel is too difficult, or logistically it's become too expensive, or if there's a second spike and places are closing down again rather than opening up, which is what everyone hopes would happen, then at least you've got that kind of initial burst of races in Europe in. So that's the target, and another reason why they do multiple ones at the first couple of venues.
It's interesting you mentioned Germany there, Chris. Is the rumours about the German Grand Prix coming back this season, because it wasn't on the calendar originally?
Yeah, because it's one that's hosted a race recently, and it was one that was struggling to make money, but obviously they don't need to worry about ticket sales now. Race hosting fees very different, and Liberty have been sort of owners of the sport when there's been races there, so it's an easier negotiation for them. They know what they're getting out of Germany. So I think now, a bit like Silverstone, they're a little bit kind of chancing their luck slightly with how much they asked from F1, but they saw an opportunity. Germany the same. They've seen this as an opportunity to host a race that normally wouldn't have been viable for them. And they're not alone with that. If you look at like Imola, they publicly come out and say, we'll host a race, we're ready, we can do it. I think Algarve as well has been similar, but they're races that there may have been initial talks, there may not, and they want F1 to come to them, and they're trying to put some pressure on by putting it out in the media. But Germany was one that they have spoken to.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned there about the Circuito do Algarve, I think, in Portugal. It's not Estoril now, but I don't think that's something we've covered on this show, but that has been upgraded to Grade 1 status for the FIA, which basically means it can host a Formula 1 Grand Prix, and I'm told that it's an excellent track. So we could see a Portuguese Grand Prix on the calendar perhaps this year, but probably in the near future.
Yeah, and the business model is turned around, like we've been discussing. Instead of circuits and local promoters sort of paying to host a race, here it's Liberty Media coming in saying, hey, we need to host a race and here's some money, please give us your real estate assets. And it's like how the Buddha International Circuit has been a massive venue to host grand Indian weddings. Anyone can go and hire a circuit and do what you want with it. So I assume that that's an interesting model for all these circuits to say, okay, we'll host a race, and you can call it whatever you want. And this is probably going to even help Liberty Media to reassess the old business model that Bernie put in place. Like they've been trying with the Miami Grand Prix, where they turn the race promoter and they just work along with the city council and try and not have a race hosting fee, but make money from other avenues. So you never know if this could just turn the way Liberty Media approaches Formula One, say in a couple of years down the line, after they learn these lessons from 2020.
You shouldn't have told me that racing circuits can hold weddings. My girlfriend will not be happy to hear that. That's dangerous information you give me there, Kunal. Oh, well, on that note, thank you very much for joining us on this week's Grid Talk podcast. We'll be back in a few weeks if there's no other big announcements in terms of races being hosted or driving rules, we'll probably do a special on another legendary driver from the past. But yes, thank you all for joining us on this show. Really do appreciate it, gentlemen.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
We are available on YouTube. We are available on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Music, Omni Studio, and Pocket Cast. Just search for the Formula One Grid Talk on those. We have a Reddit, new F1 podcast, looking for suggestions of anything you want to suggest. Any feedback is more than welcome. We've got a subreddit for our podcast as well. Just search F1 Grid Talk on there. And we've got a Patreon as well if you want to donate to lights, microphones, possibly get some new servers for Zoom. Thank you very much. Stay indoors, stay safe, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.